The cameras were rolling, the studio lights glaring, and the atmosphere already heavy with the kind of tension only live television can produce. Pete Hegseth sat forward in his chair, his voice booming with the practiced confidence of a man who had long grown accustomed to speaking without challenge. He leaned in, dismissing Jasmine Crockett with the casual arrogance of someone certain that the audience at home would laugh along with him. He smirked. He interrupted. But then, in a moment that will be replayed and dissected for years to come, Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't match his volume, didn't even look rattled. She simply straightened her posture, glanced once toward the moderator, and dropped the line that froze the room. "Pete," she said evenly, her tone calm and deliberate. "This might not be the moment for you to lecture anyone about responsibility, considering your DUI record." Silence. The word DUI seemed to echo, bouncing around the studio walls, crawling under the skin of every viewer at home. A sharp gasp cut through the crowd noise, and suddenly, the practiced smirk on Hegseth's face cracked. He blinked hard, his jaw tensed, his bravado faltered. For the first time all night, he didn't have a ready-made line. Crockett didn't need to say anything more. The weight of her words lingered, heavy and undeniable. The panel shifted uncomfortably, the moderator shuffled papers, and the cameras caught every flicker of Hegseth's unraveling composure. In that instant, America wasn't just watching a debate. America was watching a man crumble under the weight of a truth he had hoped would stay buried. Across living rooms, phones lit up with text messages, tweets were fired off, and millions leaned forward in disbelief. Crockett had pierced through the noise with surgical precision, exposing the hypocrisy that so often hides behind booming voices and patriotic slogans. The villain's armor had cracked, and the nation could feel it. But here's the thing, this was only the opening blow. The words had been spoken, the silence had stretched, and Hegseth's mask had begun to fall apart. Yet what came next would push the entire confrontation into territory no one expected. The next act would leave not just the panel, but the entire country, stunned. Why did this moment matter so much? Why did a single calm sentence cut through the chaos like a blade? To answer that, we have to step back and understand what was at stake that night. This wasn't just another panel, another round of partisan sniping. No, this was a stage where narratives about who gets to define responsibility, patriotism, and leadership in America were colliding head-on. Pete Hegseth had walked onto that set with all the confidence in the world. A decorated veteran, a Fox News host, a man who had built his brand on projecting authority, he believed the ground was his. And in his mind, a young, black, progressive congresswoman from Texas would be easy to dismiss. He came armed with smirks and one-liners, assuming the audience would rally to his side. But Jasmine Crockett had a reputation of her own. Within progressive circles, she was already known as fearless, sharp, and unwilling to play by the rules of politeness when injustice was staring her in the face. She wasn't there to survive the panel. She was there to shift it, to remind America that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, and that reputation gave her power before she even spoke. The stakes were bigger than one clash. For millions watching, Crockett's presence symbolized something larger. The frustration of communities tired of being lectured by men who weaponized patriotism while burying their own sins. For immigrants, for young activists, for anyone who had ever been silenced by arrogance, this was more than a panel. It was a stage where dignity had a chance to strike back. Hegseth didn't realize it yet, but he was standing on quicksand. His every smirk, every interruption, every attempt to talk over Crockett was being catalogued in real time by an audience primed for vindication. Each second he tried to assert dominance, the tension grew. Viewers could sense that Crockett was waiting. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't losing. She was preparing. And then, with that single revelation, the DUI she punctured the performance. It wasn't just a personal attack. It was a statement. How dare a man with his own record lecture anyone on responsibility? How dare he wear patriotism as armor while hoping his own failures remained hidden? America felt the shift. The stakes had transformed. This was no longer about policy, disagreements, or talking points. It had become a showdown between hypocrisy and dignity, between performance and truth. And deep down, the audience knew Crockett wasn't finished. Because when she finally chose to strike, she went straight for the pressure point Hegseth never thought would surface. To understand the collapse, you have to understand the man. Pete Hegseth didn't stumble onto television by accident. His story was one carefully crafted to project authority and credibility. A Princeton graduate, an Army veteran, someone who could wrap himself in the flag and be taken seriously by conservative America. He knew the power of appearances, and he leaned into them. His military service gave him a shield. Every time criticism came his way, he had that ready-made defense. "I've served my country. What have you done?" And for years, it worked. He carved a place for himself on Fox News, where his booming voice and unflinching confidence became a feature of the network's primetime debates. He wore his patriotism like a uniform, a signal that he was not to be questioned. But beneath that carefully cultivated image, there were cracks. But DUI was one of them. There were whispers, too, about his personal life controversies that didn't fit the brand of ironclad responsibility he tried to sell. Like many who thrive in environments built on outrage, He assumed those cracks would stay hidden, buried under the noise of his rhetoric. Hegseth embodied a certain type of figure familiar in American politics and media. The man who preaches morality while exempting himself from its standards. He could talk endlessly about law and order while hoping his own mistakes would be forgotten. He could shame others for their failings while expecting forgiveness for his own. It was hypocrisy cloaked in patriotism, and for too long, it worked. And yet, arrogance has a way of inviting its own downfall. He grew too comfortable, too sure that his opponents wouldn't dare to go for the jugular, too certain that the very past he carried could never be weaponized against him. That overconfidence, that swagger, became the mask he wore every time he walked onto a set. The irony, of course, is that arrogance often blinds its holder. What Hegseth didn't see was that his loudest weapon, his voice, was also his greatest weakness. The more he interrupted, the more he dismissed. The more he mocked, the more he set himself up to be undone. Because when you build your persona on being untouchable, the smallest crack becomes catastrophic. And so on that night, live in front of the nation, the crack became a chasm. His past, dragged into the light by a woman he had underestimated, began to erode the foundation of his persona. And America saw the man behind the mask. But arrogance has a funny way of collapsing the moment truth walks into the room. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise to this moment by accident. Her story is one of grit, resilience, and a refusal to be silenced in a country that too often rewards arrogance over integrity. Born into a family that understood struggle, she learned early on that dignity wasn't something handed to you, it was something you carried, even when the world tried to strip it away. She was underestimated from the start. Critics saw a young black woman with sharp edges and quick wit, and they assumed she wouldn't last long in the brutal world of politics. They expected her to play small, to defer, to quietly take her seat at the margins. But Crockett had no interest in shrinking herself to make others comfortable. She entered public service because she had lived the consequences of policies made by people who never had to endure them, and she wasn't about to bow her head to the same voices that had long dismissed people who looked like her. In her legal career, she defended those who couldn't afford the luxury of powerful lawyers. She knew what it was like to sit beside someone who had been chewed up by the system, to speak for them when no one else would. That grounding, that daily confrontation with injustice, forged a steel in her voice. When she walked into politics, she carried that same fire, the understanding that power should serve the people, not itself. Her rise was not smooth. She was mocked for her bluntness, criticized for her refusal to soften her edges. Opponents tried to brand her as angry or unprofessional, as though a woman defending her community should apologize for her passion. But what her critics didn't understand was that Crockett's strength came not from rage but from purpose. Every time they tried to diminish her, she grew sharper, calmer, more deliberate. Every insult became fuel, and behind that sharpness was sacrifice. She gave up nights with family, endured waves of online abuse, faced the unrelenting pressure of a spotlight designed to break the unprepared. But she endured, because she knew the stakes weren't about her alone. They were about everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or told they weren't enough. So when Crockett took her seat across from Hegseth that night, she carried with her not just her own story, but the weight of countless others. She didn't need to match his volume. She didn't need to outshout him. Her power was in her poise, in her ability to sit calmly while arrogance dug its own grave. And it was precisely this steel-backed poise that prepared her for the live confrontation that would make headlines. The air in the studio was already charged, but as the debate pressed on, the tension sharpened into something almost unbearable. Hegseth leaned into his chair, cutting off Crockett mid-sentence with the ease of a man who believed interruption was dominance. His voice thundered, ridiculing, dismissing, painting her as inexperienced and out of touch. He gestured broadly, looking not just at Crockett but at the cameras, performing for an audience he was certain stood with him. But Crockett didn't flinch. She sat still, her gaze steady, her hands folded in front of her. She let him run, let him fill the room with sound, let the arrogance saturate the air. To the casual observer, it might have looked like he was winning, but to those watching closely, it was clear. He was losing control. His voice grew sharper, his body leaned further forward, his interruptions more desperate. He was playing to the crowd, but the crowd at home could see the cracks. Crockett's silence was not weakness. It was strategy. Each second she held her composure, she widened the gap between them. His volume made her calm all the more powerful. His insults made her dignity glow brighter. He thought he was pushing her back. He was, in fact, building the perfect stage for her strike, and the audience felt it. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing that something was coming. Social media timelines buzzed with anticipation. Commentators whispered that Crockett seemed almost too calm. There was a storm gathering behind her stillness. Then Hegseth made the fatal mistake. He dismissed her entirely, laughing as though she were beneath him. "People like you," he scoffed, "should think twice before lecturing anyone on accountability." The smirk lingered. The arrogance hung in the air. The stage was set. Then, without raising her voice, Crockett decided to end the charade. The silence that followed was almost eerie. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, measured, almost gentle, the kind of tone that cuts sharper than any shout. "Pete," she began. This might not be the moment for you to lecture anyone about accountability. Considering your DUI record, the studio froze. The moderator blinked. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Hegseth's face twitched. His smirk faltered. His eyes darted, searching for a retort, a distraction, anything to regain the upper hand. But nothing came. The confidence that had carried him through 1,000 debates deserted him in an instant. His jaw clenched, his lips parted, but no sound followed. The silence was louder than any rebuttal. Across America, living rooms erupted. Viewers gasped, cheered, shouted at their screens. On social media, the clip was already being clipped, replayed, shared with captions of disbelief. The hashtags began forming instantly, a digital tidal wave that would soon swallow the night. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't lean back smugly or twist the knife. She simply let the silence do the work. Her calm composure amplified the devastation of her words. She had exposed the hypocrisy without theatrics, and that restraint made it even more damning. Hegseth tried to recover. He stammered, reaching for his trademark bravado. That's irrelevant, Jasmine, he sputtered, forcing a chuckle that rang hollow. But the damage was done. The audience had seen the crack in his armor, and no amount of bluster could repair it. The moderator attempted to move forward, but the energy of the room had shifted completely. Every glance at Hegseth showed a man unraveling, his cheeks flushed, his eyes restless. Every glance at Crockett revealed .com/dignity and quiet strength. The crowd could sense it. They weren't just watching a debate anymore, they were witnessing a collapse. The hero had landed her strike, and the villain's performance was crumbling in real time. Crockett pressed no further. She didn't need to. She understood something essential. When the truth is that sharp, you don't need to swing it twice. You just let it cut. The aftermath in that studio was electric. Every panelist, every crew member, every person watching knew they had seen something extraordinary. It wasn't just a clapback. It was a moment that crystallized the entire debate into one unforgettable image. Arrogance meeting accountability, and arrogance losing. But the real explosion wasn't in that studio. It was online. The clip hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within minutes of the broadcast, the moment was everywhere. On Twitter, hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Crockett, clapback. Hashtag DUIgate. Hashtag accountability, live. The 30-second exchange was being replayed in endless loops, each replay amplifying the silence that had followed her revelation. For some, it was vindication. Progressive activists celebrated flooding timelines with praise for Crockett's composure and precision. This is how you do it. One tweet read, racking up thousands of likes. Memes sprouted almost instantly. Split screens of Crockett's.com face beside Hegseth's unraveling expression. TikToks layered dramatic music over the clip, transforming it into a miniature cinematic moment for audiences scrolling late into the night. Celebrities chimed in. A-list actors, musicians, and comedians retweeted the clip with their own captions, adding gasoline to the fire. Late-night hosts joked about it before their writers' rooms had even fully scripted the next monologue. And then came the political ripple effect. Members of Congress, governors, even a few presidential candidates were asked to weigh in. Some tried to downplay it, others leaned in with open admiration, but no one could ignore it. The moment had crossed from television into the bloodstream of national conversation. Even Fox viewers, the audience Hegseth thought he owned, were divided. Comment sections filled with arguments, some doubling down in defense of him, others admitting that the look on his face had been devastating. It wasn't just the revelation of the DUI record, it was the way he had been caught off guard. Stripped of the bluster he relied on, people could see the hypocrisy with their own eyes, and it was harder to unsee than any sound. And through it all, Crockett remained steady. She didn't flood her own social media with victory laps. She didn't grant immediate interviews to bask in the glow. She simply allowed the moment to breathe, knowing that silence could be louder than self-promotion. The dignity she carried on that stage carried through to the aftermath, and it only deepened the impact. What started as a live exchange had become something else, a cultural flashpoint. Commentators declared it one of the sharpest takedowns in recent memory. Editorials framed it as a metaphor for the larger battle between truth and hypocrisy in American politics. And for ordinary people watching at home, it was a reminder that arrogance could be punctured, not with rage, but with composure. And yet beyond the memes and headlines, something deeper was revealed about dignity, truth, and America's future. It would have been easy for Crockett to let the moment rest as a personal victory, to frame it as her triumph over Hegseth, a simple clash between two personalities on live television. But that wasn't the lesson. She knew it, and the people who resonated with her words knew it too. This wasn't just about one man's scandal or one woman's composure. It was about integrity in the face of hypocrisy. It was about the quiet strength required to confront arrogance without letting it define you. Crockett had shown that truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need theatrics. When delivered with dignity, it carries its own undeniable weight. For every immigrant who had ever been told they weren't American enough, for every young activist dismissed as inexperienced, for every marginalized voice drowned out by louder, richer, more arrogant ones, this moment mattered. It said, you don't have to play their game. You don't have to match arrogance with arrogance. Stand in your dignity and let the truth do the work. That's why the clip resonated far beyond partisan lines. Even those who didn't agree with Crockett politically couldn't deny the power of what they had witnessed. They had seen arrogance punctured, hypocrisy laid bare, and dignity rise. In a time when politics often feels like a shouting match with no winners, this was different. This was clarity. The moral was simple but profound. Arrogance is temporary, but dignity endures. Lies crumble when confronted with truth. And in a democracy, accountability is not optional. Crockett didn't just expose Hegseth's DUI record, she exposed the fragility of hypocrisy itself. The confrontation became more than a viral moment. It became a mirror held up to America, asking a hard question: which side are you on? The side of arrogance, bluster, and performance, or the side of integrity, dignity, and truth? So what do we do with moments like this? That answer may rest with you. And so, we return to that headline moment. Pete Hegseth breaking down, Jasmine Crockett exposing his DUI records live. It wasn't just television. It wasn't just politics. It was a reminder of what happens when dignity refuses to be silenced. In that studio, arrogance collapsed. In that silence, truth won. And for millions watching, something stirred. The realization that integrity still matters. That hypocrisy can be defeated. That courage doesn't have to shout to be heard. This is bigger than Crockett. Bigger than Hegseth. It's about the America we're building together. One where accountability is not a weapon but a standard. One where our leaders are measured not by their bluster, but by their honesty. One where everyday people, watching from their living rooms, can feel seen and validated when someone like Crockett refuses to back down. If you felt that validation, if you felt that surge of pride, if you felt that spark of hope, don't let it fade. Share this story. Talk about it. Carry it. Because dignity doesn't spread on its own. It spreads when people like us decide that moments like this matter. Subscribe, share, be part of this movement for accountability and truth. Because arrogance will always rise again, but so will dignity, and the choice of which one prevails belongs to us.